I thought someone had hit a deer. There was blood pouring out of Karen's hose, bubbling with pink foam down her driveway while she screamed like she was being murdered. But nope, it was just Tuesday, and payback had officially arrived. And no, this isn't a movie. This is what happens when a Karenback fake tries to play boss. I jolted out of bed that morning to a surreal scene unfolding right outside my window. The normally mundane hum of a suburban morning had been replaced by an unexpected spectacle of chaos and crimson foam. As I watched, heart pounding, I couldn't believe my eyes. Karen, that perennial enforcer of petty rules, was in the middle of what could only be described as a living nightmare. Her car, usually a shiny testament to her fastidious taste, was now being doused by what looked like a scene from a horror movie. At first, I wondered if an animal had been hit or if some gruesome accident had taken place. But soon I pieced it together. Karen had used my water supply to wash her car. And as if that weren't enough, fate had decided to serve up a dish of retribution. The scene was not accidental. It was payback, precise and calculated. I remembered all too well the countless times Karen had overstepped her bounds, meddling in every aspect of our community life with her overzealous enforcement of arbitrary rules. This time, her insistence on flaunting her superiority by using my water for her own vanity had finally tipped the scales. The sight of pink-tinged foam streaming from her hose, as if a butcher's tank had been unleashed, was the final trigger. In that moment, I knew it was time to show her that actions have consequences and no one was above receiving a dose of their own medicine. Today, Karen's lavish car wash was going to backfire in the most unforgettable way, one that would leave her red-faced and the entire neighborhood talking. And trust me, this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment reaction. It was the culmination of years of watching her boss around with a smug smile, thinking she controlled the very essence of our community. My property lies on the edge of Oakwood Meadows, a once peaceful suburban enclave that prided itself on pristine lawns, uniform houses, and an unwavering commitment to order. Every resident was expected to adhere strictly to the HOA's guidelines. In this meticulously maintained neighborhood, individuality was a luxury that few dared to exercise. At the heart of this rigid system was Karen Miller, widely known as HOA Karen. In her early 50s, Karen was the self-appointed arbiter of perfection. Dressed always in conservative attire, her sharp eyes and constant grip on a clipboard made her both revered and feared. She patrolled the neighborhood with an almost militaristic precision, keen on reporting every minor infraction, from a slightly overgrown hedge to a mismatched window box. To Karen, any display of personal flair was an affront to the uniform beauty of Oakwood Meadows, and she spared no opportunity to enforce her own narrow interpretation of order. I, on the other hand, am a longtime resident with a penchant for living on my own terms. My modest home sits on a sprawling plot of land that I've nurtured with care, turning it into a sanctuary where creativity and self-reliance reign. I run a small farm stand on my property, selling fresh produce, homemade preserves, and other artisanal goods that reflect my passion for sustainable living. My business is not just a source of income. It's an expression of my identity, a celebration of the freedom to be different. Over the years, my farm stand has become a beloved fixture among locals, a vibrant counterpoint to the rigid conformity that the HOA so desperately enforced. However, my independent spirit and refusal to conform have long made me a target for Karen's wrath. Her constant fines for unauthorized modifications and her endless complaints about my bright signage and eclectic decor were more than just nuisances. They were attempts to stamp out the very individuality that defines me. So when Karen went as far as banning my farm stand from operating on my own land, it wasn't just a violation of my rights. It was a personal insult. I knew that I couldn't let this slide. The fine that she imposed, a hefty $50,000 penalty for an unapproved use of water and space, was intended to crush my spirit. Instead, it lit a fire under me. I began to devise a counter-strategy, one that would not only reclaim my property rights, but also serve as a stark lesson in the consequences of overreach. And then it hit me. Karen's entire worldview revolved around material excess and the relentless pursuit of an immaculate image. I knew exactly where to strike. A place she held dear, the grocery store where she shopped religiously. In my eyes, that store was a monument to everything Karen valued: order, luxury, and an unyielding adherence to rules. By acquiring the very store that symbolized her narrow vision, I could flip the script entirely. This wasn't just about money. It was about reclaiming control, about showing that the power of one independent homeowner could disrupt an entire system of oppression. Oakwood Meadows was a community divided. Many residents had grown tired of the HOA's arbitrary rules, though they often remained silent out of fear of reprisal. But now, with my stand and my bold countermeasure, whispers of rebellion were becoming roars of dissent. The stage was set for a dramatic showdown between an overzealous enforcer and a community ready to embrace freedom, creativity, and the right to live life on one's own terms. The conflict began to simmer the moment Karen's fine hit my mailbox. I'd spent countless hours documenting every detail of my farm stand, from the lush rows of tomatoes to the charming hand-painted signs that welcomed customers. I knew I had done nothing wrong. Every aspect of my stand was in full compliance with local laws. Yet, Karen's fine, citing vague aesthetic violations and unauthorized use of water, threatened to destroy not only my livelihood, but the spirit of creativity I had cultivated over the years. Furious, I started to collect evidence. I reviewed video footage from my security cameras, capturing every incident of Karen's frequent patrols and her sneaky glances at my property. Neighbors came forward with their own stories, accounts of fines for harmless acts and whispers of similar grievances. The digital dossier grew by the day, a testament to a system that valued conformity over innovation. I soon realized that this wasn't just about my farm stand. It was a broader attack on the right to live and work freely. Karen's actions were emblematic of a wider issue in Oakwood Meadows, where personal expression was crushed under the weight of arbitrary rules. The more I uncovered, the more determined I became to fight back. I began strategizing my counterattack, drawing on every resource available. Late one night, after poring over my notes and discussing the situation with a few trusted neighbors, I had an epiphany. If Karen was so obsessed with controlling what appeared on her pristine streets, then I would take control of the very institution she revered, the local grocery store where she shopped religiously. By buying that store, I could undermine her influence and reclaim a portion of the power she wielded over our community. It was a daring idea, one that would require not only financial acumen, but also the unwavering support of the residents who had grown tired of her constant meddling. I began reaching out to local business brokers and financial advisors, exploring the possibility of acquiring the store. Meanwhile, I shared my plan on community forums, and the response was overwhelming. Neighbors expressed their support, many revealing that they, too, had suffered from the HOA's heavy-handed policies. The hashtag by the store began trending locally as residents rallied behind the idea of taking a stand against the tyranny of arbitrary fines. As the planning progressed, Karen remained oblivious to the storm that was gathering. In her typical fashion, she continued to issue fines and make public statements about the importance of maintaining community standards. Each new fine was like a personal challenge thrown down at my feet, a gauntlet I was determined to pick up. I meticulously documented every instance of her overreach, every letter and email that revealed her bias, and every complaint filed against my farm stand that I believed was completely unfounded. Tensions escalated as I finalized the preliminary steps toward acquiring the grocery store. I held secret meetings with potential investors, and soon enough, the necessary financial arrangements began to take shape. The move was audacious, and I knew it would send shockwaves through Oakwood Meadows. It wasn't just about reclaiming my business. It was about proving that no one, not even the most relentless enforcer of HOA rules, could dictate how we lived our lives. Late one chilly evening, I received confirmation that the preliminary agreements for the store purchase were in place. The digital dossier I had built now stood as irrefutable proof of Karen's overreach, and the community's digital support was a roaring chorus of defiance. I posted an update on the neighborhood forum, complete with images of the store's exterior and a bold declaration. When Karen bans your farm stand, you take control of the very institution she worships. The post went viral, and soon my plan was the talk of the community. But even as I prepared for the next phase of my plan, I knew that Karen's reaction would be swift. Rumors circulated that she was preparing to file yet another complaint, a final, desperate attempt to restore her image. The stakes had never been higher. My personal battle had morphed into a community-wide movement, a fight for individual rights against a system that had long punished creativity. And as the digital evidence mounted and the petitions gathered signatures, it was clear that a turning point was imminent, a moment when the balance of power in Oakwood Meadows would shift irrevocably in favor of the people. In the days following the announcement of my plan to buy the grocery store, the atmosphere in Oakwood Meadows grew electric. Social media platforms exploded with support for my cause. Posts featuring photos of my thriving farm stand, screenshots of Karen's baseless finds, and bold hashtags like #FarmStandFreedom and #BuyTheStore lit up the digital space. Neighbors who had long been voiceless under the oppressive rules of the HOA now found their voices, and every comment and shared post was a declaration of independence. Local news outlets caught wind of the controversy and descended upon Oakwood Meadows. Reporters interviewed shocked residents, capturing candid moments of outrage and solidarity. It's incredible to see someone take such a bold stand. One news anchor commented during a live broadcast, challenging the very foundation of an HOA that has long stifled personal expression. The narrative evolved rapidly. What began as a dispute over a farm stand was now a symbol of resistance, a fight for the right to innovate and live freely. Within the HOA board, tensions reached a boiling point. Emergency meetings were held in the hushed confines of boardrooms, and leaked minutes revealed deep divisions. Some board members, once staunch supporters of Karen's rigid enforcement, began to acknowledge that her actions were a gross abuse of power. We must respect the rights of our residents, not crush their individuality with arbitrary fines, one member was quoted as saying in a leaked document. Others, however, clung to the old ways, arguing that order was paramount. The discord within the board mirrored the growing unrest among the residents. My digital dossier continued to grow. I posted updated videos and photos of every new development, be it a freshly printed fine, a screenshot of another of Karen's threatening emails, or an update on the progress of my store acquisition. The online community rallied behind my efforts, with digital petitions amassing thousands of signatures and supportive hashtags trending locally. Influential bloggers and local activists began to weigh in, championing the cause of property rights and creative freedom. This is about more than one man's farm stand, one popular blog post declared. It's a fight for the very soul of our community. Karen, feeling the mounting pressure, tried desperately to salvage her authority. She issued a series of stern statements on social media, insisting that the fines were necessary for maintaining order and that my actions were unpatriotic and disrespectful to the values of Oakwood Meadows. But every statement was met with counterarguments, digital evidence, and the resounding voices of a community that had had enough. Videos of her confrontations with residents, along with the unequivocal evidence of her overreach, circulated widely, painting a picture of an enforcer who had lost her grip on reality. As the controversy reached its apex, the HOA board announced a final public hearing to address the matter once and for all. The announcement sent shockwaves through the community, and in the days leading up to the hearing, residents organized rallies, distributed flyers, and coordinated online campaigns. Every shared post and every hashtag reinforced the sentiment that if the HOA board did not act, then the oppressive legacy of arbitrary fines would persist unchecked. On the morning of the final hearing, the community center was packed. Neighbors, armed with signs and digital evidence, filled the hallways. The air was thick with anticipation and resolve. This was the moment when the power dynamics in Oakwood Meadows would be redrawn. I arrived with my digital dossier in hand, knowing that every piece of evidence would speak for itself. The room buzzed with murmurs of support and determination as residents recounted their own experiences of harassment by the HOA. The stage was set for a dramatic showdown. The community's collective voice, bolstered by social media, digital petitions, and the overwhelming evidence of Karen's abuse of power, was about to force the HOA board to confront the reality of the situation. The tension was palpable. Every conversation, every shared video clip, every supportive comment was a declaration that our rights as property owners and creative entrepreneurs were non-negotiable. The decisive moment arrived on a cool, brisk morning in a packed boardroom at the Crescent Meadows Community Center. The room was filled with HOA officials, local law enforcement representatives, community leaders, and a sea of determined residents, all gathered for the final public hearing that would decide the future of our community's enforcement policies. With a calm yet unyielding presence, Councilwoman Melissa Carter stepped up to the podium, her eyes blazing with the hope and resolve of a community that had had enough. After a comprehensive review of all digital evidence, including time-stamped security footage, detailed records of fines, and the impassioned testimonies of our residents, we have reached an incontrovertible conclusion. Councilwoman Carter began, her voice resonating with authority. It is abundantly clear that the actions taken by Mrs. Karen Miller, specifically her decision to ban my farm stand and impose arbitrary fines, were not rooted in any legitimate concern for community aesthetics or order, but were driven by personal bias and an abuse of power. Our community's rights, the right to live and innovate without interference, must be upheld at all costs. A heavy silence fell over the room as Carter continued. Effective immediately, the HOA board will rescind all fines and sanctions imposed as a result of these actions, and we will initiate a full disciplinary review of the policies that allowed such overreach. Furthermore, we will implement new guidelines that safeguard the rights of every resident to manage their own property as they see fit. Today's decision is not merely about reversing an arbitrary fine. It is a resounding declaration that Crescent Meadows stands for fairness, accountability, and individual freedom. Her words sent ripples through the audience, and murmurs of approval filled the room. At that moment, a respected community advocate, renowned for his steadfast commitment to property rights, rose to speak. Today, we stand united, he declared, his voice ringing with passion. No resident should have their right to live and work freely compromised by the arbitrary whims of an overzealous enforcer. Let this vote mark the turning point, a clear signal that our community values creativity, independence, and the sanctity of private property above all else. We demand accountability, and we will ensure that every violation of our rights is met with swift, decisive action. His declaration was met with thunderous applause, uniting the room in a powerful call for change. Following his address, a senior officer from the local business oversight office presented the final dossier, a meticulously compiled record of all digital evidence, expert testimonies, and official documents confirming the legitimacy of my operations and exposing the baseless nature of Karen's fines. The evidence was irrefutable. My farm stand operated within all legal parameters, and Karen's actions were nothing short of a personal vendetta. The Internal Affairs panel unanimously endorsed strict disciplinary measures against any abuse of power, and the full report was scheduled for immediate public release. Councilwoman Carter concluded, "Let this resolution mark the dawn of a new era for Crescent Meadows, a community where every resident's rights and freedoms are respected, where public authority is exercised with integrity, and where creativity is celebrated rather than suppressed." Our vote today is a resounding declaration that we will protect our property, our livelihoods, and our ability to innovate without fear of arbitrary interference. Together, we stand for justice, transparency, and the inalienable right to live freely. Her final words, delivered with unwavering conviction, sealed the turning point in our battle for property rights and creative freedom. In that defining moment, as every face in the boardroom shone with determination and hope, the balance of power shifted irrevocably. The overwhelming digital evidence and the unified voice of the community forced the HOA board to take decisive action, a turning point that would forever reshape the governance of Crescent Meadows. The days of petty fines and personal vendettas were over, and a future built on respect for individual rights was finally within our grasp. In the weeks that followed the historic vote, Crescent Meadows underwent a profound transformation. News of the rescinded fines and sweeping reforms enacted by the HOA board spread rapidly through local media and social networks, igniting passionate debates about property rights, creative freedom, and community governance. Editorials in the local newspaper, with headlines such as "A New Dawn for Crescent Meadows" and "Community United for Freedom," celebrated the decisive actions taken to protect every resident's right to innovate and express themselves without fear. Hashtags like #PropertyRights, #NoMoreAnti-Bullying, and #ArtIsFreedom trended widely, reinforcing our collective determination to stand up against arbitrary rule enforcement. Town hall meetings and community forums saw a record attendance as residents gathered to share their experiences and to envision a future free from oppressive oversight. Neighbors, who had long lived under the strictures of an overbearing HOA, now spoke proudly about their right to manage their property in a way that reflected their individuality. "Our land is our legacy, and we must protect it at all costs," one impassioned resident declared at a bustling meeting, his voice echoing through the crowded room. The atmosphere was charged with hope, a promise that Crescent Meadows would always honor the creative spirit of its residents. Within the reformed HOA board and local public safety departments, swift changes were implemented. Senior officials, led by Director James Carter and Lieutenant Marcus Reed, launched comprehensive training programs on ethical conduct, cultural sensitivity, and the responsible management of community resources. Regular internal audits and transparent disciplinary procedures were established to ensure that every complaint was meticulously scrutinized and that no resident would ever again be subjected to arbitrary fines or invasive oversight. Our duty is to protect the rights and dignity of every member of our community, Lieutenant Reed affirmed in a follow-up press conference, reinforcing our renewed commitment to justice and fairness. Community leaders and local civil rights organizations also mobilized to empower residents further. Workshops, public forums, and educational campaigns were organized to raise awareness about property rights and the importance of creative freedom. When we stand together, our voices have the power to reshape our community, a local activist proclaimed at a town hall meeting, inspiring neighbors to unite in the fight for a more inclusive governance model. For me, the journey from confrontation to resolution was both deeply personal and profoundly transformative. My decision to stand up against HOA Karen's arbitrary fines for my farm stand, and to reclaim my rights by buying the grocery store she worshipped, had not only restored my livelihood, but had ignited a movement that resonated throughout Crescent Meadows. Neighbors, once silenced by fear, now shared their own stories of resistance, and the digital evidence that exposed Karen's misdeeds became a beacon of hope for every resident who believed in the sanctity of private property and the right to live freely. Karen Miller, once the formidable enforcer of the HOA's draconian policies, was reduced to a cautionary tale, a stark reminder that no one is above accountability when a community stands united for justice. Her influence dwindled as digital records of her past transgressions circulated widely, underscoring the need for reform and the dangers of unchecked authority. At a final celebratory event held in the Central Park of Crescent Meadows, residents, local officials, and community advocates gathered under the soft glow of the setting sun. A large banner reading "Unity, Freedom, and Property Rights" was unfurled between towering oak trees, and heartfelt speeches resonated with promises of a brighter, more inclusive future. Today, we celebrate our victory over arbitrary interference, a victory for every homeowner and every creative entrepreneur in our community, Councilwoman Carter proclaimed, her voice ringing with determination. The standing ovation that followed was a powerful affirmation of our collective commitment to protecting our freedoms and ensuring that no one can abuse public power again. As each new day dawned over Crescent Meadows, the legacy of that fateful confrontation endured as a beacon of transformative change. The story of how HOA Karen banned my farm stand and how I took control of the grocery store, turning the tables on an enforcer who sought to stifle creativity, became a rallying cry for every resident who believed that property rights and the freedom to innovate were inalienable. Every sunrise now carried with it the promise that in Crescent Meadows, truth, justice, and creative freedom would forever prevail. In the end, what began as a personal battle evolved into a watershed moment for our entire community. We emerged more united, more vigilant, and more determined to safeguard our rights against any form of bureaucratic overreach. And as the sun rose each morning over our reclaimed neighborhood, it carried with it the promise that Crescent Meadows would forever be a place where creativity, integrity, and respect for individual expression shone brightly.